Cold coffee Ark Station Nine had been spinning in orbit around the gas giant Terranib for over 30 years, and in that time it had become home to thousands of beings who hadn't landed there because they wanted to, but because the trade lanes had decided for them. There were no sunrises out here, no sunsets, just synthetic lighting that clicked on every morning at 6 sharp Earth standard, as if somebody still thought it mattered to keep up the illusion for people who'd long since forgotten what real daylight smelled like. Jake Turner had stopped noticing that illusion about 2 years back. He woke up, pulled on his coveralls, stenciled technical services, level 3, grabbed a thermos of coffee that tasted like watered-down rust, and went to go fix whatever had broken. On Ark 9, something always had. That particular morning, it wasn't just the oxygen valve in Sector C that was busted. Something a lot quieter had broken too. Jake just didn't know it yet. He was cutting through the maintenance crew's cafeteria when he saw her for the first time. The girl was sitting alone at the farthest table, tucked in a corner where the shadows from the vent grates fell in stripes across the floor, like somebody had drawn a cage and forgotten to erase it. Her skin was a pale gray-green with a faint metallic sheen that only caught the light at certain angles. Her eyes were too big for her face, dark, almost black. No visible whites. In front of her sat a tray of food she hadn't touched. Jake had seen kids like her before, refugees, orphans of trade wars, kids of station workers shipped out here because there was nobody left at home to feed them. Usually they clustered together, holding on to each other like puppies on a cold night. This kid was sitting by herself, and the way she held her spine, too straight, too careful, said more than any of that ever could. He could have kept walking. Everybody else did. Nobody sat down with somebody else's kid on Ark 9. The hierarchy of species here was too tangled, too easy to insult a family you didn't even know existed. But Jake thought of his little sister, the time she sat on the school steps for 2 hours because their dad forgot to pick her up, and how hard she'd worked at looking like she didn't care. He walked over and sat down across from the girl without asking anybody important for permission. "You gonna eat that?" he asked, nodding at the tray. The girl looked up, and something like alarm flickered across her face. "I'm not allowed to sit with registered families," she said in a flat voice, like she was warning him off a mistake before he made it. "Good thing I'm not a registered family," Jake said, unwrapping his sandwich from its wax paper. "I'm not really anything. Broken pipes and busted vents, mostly." She blinked at him like she was trying to work out a joke in a language she hadn't used yet. "You're human," she said finally. "Most days." Jake tore his sandwich in half and slid it across the table. "Chicken. Won't glow, scream, or try to cut you a trade deal." The girl stared at the food like it might vanish if she believed in it too fast. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because you're hungry," Jake shrugged. "Do I need your house name to split a sandwich?" "People always ask," she said. "A lot of dumb questions." That's almost a smile, Jake thought, watching the corner of her mouth twitch. "I'm Jake," he said, taking the first bite so she'd know it was safe. "Technical services. I fix vents, unclog filters, and disappoint my mom by not calling enough." The girl picked up her half of the sandwich carefully with both hands. "Naya," she said. "Just Naya. Nice to meet you, just Naya." This time she really did smile. Small, careful, like she was trying out a feeling she hadn't worn in a while. A few tables over, a cluster of young Oranai, a tall, slender species with pale violet skin, dressed in silver-threaded uniforms, watched them with open disgust. One of them, taller than the rest, leaned back in his chair with the lazy confidence of a guy who'd never once been told no by anybody who mattered. Jake clocked him, then noticed something else. A small black drone hovering near the ceiling, too polished to be station security, too quiet to be a commercial unit. Its lens made a slight adjustment, focusing on him. Jake looked at it for half a second, decided it was above his pay grade, and turned back to Naya. "Apple?" he asked. She nodded. He split it in two, having no idea that 37 Imperial cameras had just recorded his face, his name, and the exact moment he became the only person on Ark Station 9 who treated the hidden granddaughter of the most powerful woman in the galaxy like a kid instead of a problem. Part 2. Raiding the food. The next day, Jake told himself not to make a habit of it. People on stations got weird about kindness. Hold a door once, and suddenly somebody thinks you've declared an alliance, insulted their bloodline, or accidentally proposed a trade pact. So when his lunch break rolled around, he grabbed his usual sad tray, walked past the diplomatic students, and tried not to look toward the far corner. He failed before he reached the drink machine. Naya was there again, hands folded in her lap, a fresh tray in front of her, untouched. This time she'd picked a table by the wall, half hidden behind a decorative plant shipped in from some low-gravity moon. Jake stopped, looked down at the sandwich in his hand, then at her. "You know," he said, walking over, "if this is going to be a regular thing, you're going to need to start rating the food." Naya looked up, and the relief on her face showed before she could hide it. "I don't know how to rate food." "Easy. 10 means your grandma would approve. 1 means it came out of that machine over there." He pointed at the dispenser he'd supposedly fixed the day before. Right on cue, the machine gave a sad mechanical cough and dropped a cup sideways onto the floor. "That's a 1, Jake said, nodding. Naya covered her mouth with both hands, trying not to laugh too loud. It came out anyway, soft, startled, and a few students turned to stare, like laughter from her table had violated the room's seating chart. Jake ignored them. "So, just Naya. Where are you from?" Her smile faded a little. "Far away." "That's a terrible answer." "It's the safest one." Jake stopped unwrapping his food. He knew better than to push. Back home, when somebody said something like that, you let the silence do the work. "Fair enough," he said. "I'm from a town where it rains 9 months out of the year and everybody pretends hiking is a personality." Naya studied him like he'd just handed her classified intel. "You miss it." "Mostly when the air recyclers make everything smell like hot plastic." "Why'd you leave?" The honest answer was bills, student loans, his mom's medical debt, and jobs that sounded exciting until you realized exciting meant a burst pipe at 3 in the morning. But she was a kid, and kids deserve the truth without all the extra weight. "Earth's beautiful," he said. "Beautiful doesn't pay rent." Naya nodded like that made more sense than it should have. "I was sent here to study people." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Rough subject. They don't like me," she said plainly, not fishing for sympathy, just naming the weather. Jake looked across the cafeteria. The young R&I sat in clusters of polished uniforms and family colors, voices low and sharp, posture perfect. Nobody at those tables looked lonely. That didn't mean they weren't. "Maybe they just don't know you," Jake said. "They know enough. I have no house name here, no escort, no banner, nobody important claims me." Jake took a bite, chewed, then pointed the rest of his sandwich at her. Back home, if a kid showed up alone at lunch, decent people made room, and if somebody didn't like that, they could find another table. Naya stared at him for a long second. "Humans talk like rules are optional." "Nah," Jake said. "We just argue with the stupid ones." That got her laughing again, and this time she didn't cover her mouth. Above them, near the ceiling, the little black drone drifted soundlessly between the light fixtures. Part 3. The Vale. Heir. Jake learned his name 3 days later. Cassian Vale, son of a trading house that controlled half the logistics routes in the sector. The kid moved through the station like the floor had been built for him personally. That morning, Cassian stood up from his table and crossed the cafeteria toward them, wearing the smile of a guy who just found a stray animal in the wrong hallway. "How touching," he said through the translator, his voice smooth enough to sound polite if you ignored the venom underneath. The nameless girls found herself a mammal to feed her. Naya's fingers tightened around her napkin. Jake noticed, but he didn't stand. "She was hungry," Jake said, wiping mustard off his thumb. "Was she?" Cassian's smile widened. "Maybe the station should put a bowl out for her by the service entrance." One of the students behind him gave a sharp little laugh. Naya stared at the table. Jake leaned back in his chair. He could feel the old heat rising in his chest. The same heat he used to get in high school when some loudmouth picked on whoever had the wrong shoes or the wrong lunch bag. But he wasn't 17 anymore. He had rent to make, a badge number, a mother back home who still worried when he skipped a Sunday call. So he kept his voice flat. That's a lot of words to say your parents never taught you manners. The cafeteria went quiet in a way Jake hadn't expected. Even the drink dispenser stopped making noise, which felt personal. Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who I am, human?" "Nope." Jake picked up his coffee. "But I'm starting to get the general idea. I'm Lord Cassian of House Vale." Cassian leaned in, lowering his voice. "My family secures trade corridors for half this sector. My father sits on the Dominion Advisory Council. You fix vending machines. Beverage machines too, technically." Jake took a sip. "You think that's funny?" "No," Jake said. "I think it's lunch." The words landed harder than they should have. Cassian wanted fear. He wanted Jake to grasp the shape of the room, the invisible lines of rank and blood and permission. Instead, Jake kept making the whole thing sound small, which is exactly what bullies hate most. Cassian turned his attention back to Naya. "And you," he said, still pretending silence was dignity. "Everyone knows what silence means. It means nobody claims you." Naya's face barely changed. Barely, but enough for Jake to see the sentence find its mark. Jake slid the other half of the apple across the table to her. "Eat," he said quietly. Cassian glanced at the apple, then back at Jake. "Do humans often feed strays?" Jake held his stare a second, then gave Naya the smallest nod, like they were the only two people at the table. Only when everybody else forgets they're people. For the first time, Cassian's polite mask cracked. Not all the way, just enough. His jaw tightened. Above them, the black drone dropped a few inches, its lens adjusting with a soft mechanical whir. Cassian noticed. "Interesting," he murmured. "The girl with no banner has a watcher." Jake didn't like the way he said that. Didn't like the way Naya went still. Cassian stepped back, his smile returning, thinner this time. "Enjoy your lunch, human. You may have just bought yourself more trouble than you can afford." Part 4. Airlock 7. Cassian waited 2 days before making his move, because kids like him rarely act when they're angry. They act when they think they can make cruelty look like discipline. Jake never saw it coming. That was the part that ate at him afterward. He'd been sent to the service corridor behind the West Learning Wing, pushing a cart loaded with filters, sealant packs, and one replacement valve the size of a bowling ball. His left shoulder ached from hauling gear all morning. His stomach was growling, and his whole plan for lunch was to sit with Naya, split a packet of peanut butter, and pretend the cafeteria coffee hadn't personally betrayed him. The station felt too quiet. No student chatter in the halls, no instructors, just the low hum of the climate systems and the occasional click of Jake's boots on the polished floor. Then his tablet buzzed with a maintenance alert from Auxiliary Airlock 7. Flagged low priority, which made no sense. Airlocks were never low priority. Jake frowned, tapped the screen, and watched the alert vanish before the diagnostic even loaded. Somebody had canceled it remotely. "That's weird," he muttered. He turned the cart around and headed for the auxiliary corridor. Halfway there, he saw Cassian and 2 of his friends walking away from the restricted section, uniforms spotless, faces calm in the rehearsed way rich kids get when they've already agreed on the story. Cassian spotted Jake and smiled. "Lost again, human?" Jake kept one hand on the cart handle. "Working? Then work somewhere else. This wing's reserved." "Funny, my tablet says otherwise." Cassian's smile thinned. "Your tablet says what it's allowed to say." Jake looked past him. Down the hall, a small gray-green hand pressed against the narrow window of Auxiliary Airlock 7. For 1 second, the whole station seemed to hold its breath. Naya was inside. The chamber lights had shifted to the pale white used for cold storage species, and frost was starting to fog the glass from the inside. Her face was calm in a way that scared Jake worse than panic would have. She was trying not to be trouble, trying to survive politely. Jake moved before he had a full plan. Cassian stepped into his path. "It's a harmless lesson," he said softly. "She needed to learn where she belongs." Jake looked at him, and the heat in his chest went cold instead of hot. That was new. "Move! You've got no clearance." Jake reached into the cart and pulled out a heavy manual override wrench. "I've got tools." One of Cassian's friends laughed nervously. "You open that door without noble authorization, you'll be charged with interference." Jake walked around them. "Then spell my name right." The airlock panel rejected his badge 3 times. Jake dropped to one knee, popped the lower casing, and started tearing into the manual access cover. Behind him, Cassian's voice sharpened. "Security will hear about this." "Good," Jake said, twisting the wrench until the panel sparked and went dark. "Maybe they'll explain why they're not here already." Inside the chamber, Naya slid down the wall, still conscious, still trying to look brave. Jake felt his hands shake once, then forced them steady. He thought of his sister on those school steps, knees pulled to her chest, pretending she hadn't been forgotten. He thought of every adult who'd ever said it wasn't their place. "Come on," he whispered to the door. "Don't do this to me." The lock fought him for another 10 seconds, then gave with a hard metal clunk. Jake yanked the door open, and a wave of cold air rolled over his boots. Naya looked up at him, eyes unfocused. "I didn't touch anything," she said, like she expected to be blamed. "I know," Jake said, stripping off his work jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders. "I tried to wait. You waited long enough." He lifted her carefully, not like some hero out of a story, just a tired guy carrying a scared kid out of the cold because nobody else had bothered. Station security finally rounded the corner, uniforms bright, voices loud, questions already aimed at Jake instead of the boys who'd locked the door. Cassian folded his hands behind his back and put on the face of an offended noble. This human-damaged diplomatic property. Jake held Naya closer as she shivered inside his jacket. He looked at the security captain, then at the wrecked panel, then back at Cassian. He kept his voice low. She was freezing in there. Nobody answered. Above the corridor, the black drone descended from the light fixtures, its lens locking onto Jake's chilled fingers, Naya's trembling hands, and Cassian's spotless smile. Part 5. The Review Chamber. Jake learned real quick that on Ark Station 9, saving a kid could get you cuffed faster than hurting one, if the paperwork belonged to the right family. Not metal cuffs. A soft blue restraint field that wrapped around his wrists and hummed every time he moved, which somehow made the whole thing feel more insulting. Naya sat on a medical bench across the hall, wrapped in Jake's jacket, a thermal blanket over her shoulders, while 2 medics checked her eyes and her temperature. She kept trying to look at him, and every time she did, a security officer stepped between them, like Jake was the dangerous part of the room. "I'm fine," Naya said for the 4th time, her voice small but steady. "He helped me." The security captain didn't even turn his head. "Your statement gets recorded after the disciplinary review." Jake looked at the captain's spotless uniform, then at Cassian standing behind him, hands folded like a disappointed choir boy. "How convenient," Jake said. "The one who got locked in the airlock talks later. The ones with titles talk now. Technician Turner, you're advised to stay quiet." "I've been advised worse." They walked him up to a review chamber on the station's administrative level, a round room with floating seats arranged above the floor, so every official could look down without having to admit they enjoyed it. Jake stood in the center under harsh white light, wrists still bound, shirt damp with condensation, fingers raw and stinging from wrestling the cold panel open. He suddenly became very aware of how he looked. Work boots, grease on his pants, messy hair, crooked badge. The kind of guy nobody invites into rooms like this unless something's already broken. Lord Cassian looked perfect. Of course he did. He stood beside a family advocate in dark ceremonial robes, speaking with rehearsed regret. I regret the disturbance, Cassian said. The human misunderstood a private educational exercise and damaged noble property. He then touched an unclaimed minor without authorization and made a public scene. Jake stared at him. A private educational exercise. You will not interrupt, one of the council officials snapped. Jake took a slow breath. He could feel fear now, real fear, crawling up from his gut. Losing this job meant losing his station housing. Losing housing meant a deportation shuttle back to Earth, back to medical bills, apology calls to his mom, and the ugly little shame of coming home because he couldn't keep his head down. He thought about saying sorry, not because he meant it, but because sometimes adults survive by swallowing the truth and calling it professionalism. Then he looked through the glass and saw Naya sitting alone again, Jake's oversized jacket still around her shoulders, the only proof anybody had cared. The fear didn't go away. It just stepped aside. I want the airlock logs, Jake said. The chamber went quiet. The lead official, a narrow-faced alien named Director Crane, tilted his head. That data's restricted. It's an environmental system tied to station safety. I'm maintenance. I know how those logs work. You're accused of destroying the panel that stores them. Jake lifted his bound hands slightly. I damaged the door control, not the backup recorder. Cassian's expression flickered fast enough that most of the room missed it. Jake didn't. There's a secondary thermal log in the corridor junction, Jake went on. Records temperature shifts, access attempts, badge pings, manual overrides. Pull it. Director Crane glanced at the security captain. The captain glanced at Cassian's advocate. Nobody moved. That told Jake everything. You're not interested in what happened, Jake said quietly. You're interested in who's expensive to offend. A low murmur rippled through the room. Cassian's advocate stepped forward. This is exactly the instability we warned about. Humans are emotionally reactive. They confuse personal sentiment with lawful order. Jake gave a tired laugh, just once. A kid got locked in a freezing room. The chamber was within survivable limits for several species. Not hers. You're not qualified to make that determination. Jake's voice dropped. Neither were the people who left her there. The silence after that was different. He hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened anybody. He'd just said the thing everyone else had been stepping around. Director Crane leaned back, face hard. Technician Jake Turner, pending further review. Your work credentials are suspended. You'll be held in temporary detention until a transfer authority is determined. Through the glass, Naya shot to her feet so fast the thermal blanket slid off her shoulders. No, she said. The officials ignored her. Jake turned his head and tried to give her a calm look, the kind adults give kids when they're scared too, but refused to pass it on. It's okay, he said. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Part 6. The pendant, Naya's pendant, didn't light up right away. That was what made it worse. If it had flashed or screamed or shot beams across the room, the officials might have understood they were looking at power. Instead, it made one small sound, a soft click, like a key turning in an old front door, and every screen in the review chamber went dark. Director Crane froze with his hands still raised. The security captain looked up at the ceiling, suddenly a lot less sure of his uniform. Cassian's advocate stopped mid-sentence, his polished mouth hanging open around words that no longer mattered. Jake felt the restraint field around his wrists flicker, loosen, then vanish completely. He rubbed his hands together, surprised by the sudden quiet. That normal? He asked. Nobody answered. Outside the glass wall, Naya stood in Jake's oversized jacket, her small gray-green fingers wrapped around the pendant. She looked scared, but not the way she'd looked in the airlock. This was different. This was the fear of a kid deciding to tell the truth, and knowing the adults in the room were about to hate her for it. Naya, Director Crane said carefully, suddenly using her name like it had weight. Step away from the unauthorized device. She didn't step away. It's not unauthorized. The black drone that had trailed her for days dropped down from the ceiling and hovered by her shoulder. Its lens opened wider, revealing a golden core Jake had never seen before. Every door in the chamber sealed shut with a smooth mechanical thud. The station lights dimmed, not like a power failure, more like the building itself was lowering its voice. A symbol appeared on the central screen, a white crown over a field of stars. Cassian went pale. Not gray, actually pale. His friends backed away from him, like distance might count as a legal defense. Naya lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice was still a kid's voice, still small. But every translator in the room stopped trying to soften it. "Grandmother," she said, "I'm done watching." The symbol expanded. The air above the review floor bent into a clean column of light, and a woman appeared inside it, tall and still, wrapped in dark ceremonial robes that looked less like clothing and more like night gathered around her shoulders. Her skin carried the same gray-green sheen as Naya's, but colder, older, sharpened by years of being obeyed. Empress Celine Oren didn't shout. She didn't need to. The room folded under her silence. One by one, the officials dropped to their knees. Director Crane nearly tripped doing it. The security captain went down so fast his shoulder plates clicked against the floor. Cassian stared half a heartbeat too long before his advocate grabbed his sleeve and yanked him down beside him. Jake stayed standing, because nobody had handed him a manual, and because Naya was still on the other side of the glass, looking like she might come apart if one more adult vanished from her sight line. The Empress noticed. Of course she did. Her gaze swept the room, passed over the kneeling officials, paused on Cassian, then settled on Jake. "You're Jake Turner," she said. Jake cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am." Somewhere behind him, Director Crane made a sound that translated roughly to, "That is not the correct way to address the most powerful ruler in known space." Jake ignored it. The Empress looked at his scraped-up hands, his crooked badge, the grease on his shirt, then at the jacket around her granddaughter's shoulders. "You opened the airlock?" "Yes, ma'am." "Without rank?" "Yes." "Without clearance?" "That's also true." "Why?" Jake could feel every kneeling official waiting for him to say something grand enough to survive the moment. He didn't have anything grand, just the truth. "Because she was cold," he said. Naya pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. The Empress turned slowly toward the council officials. The temperature in the room seemed to drop without the air changing at all. "Bring me the logs," she said. Director Crane swallowed. "Your Majesty, the matter is under local review." The Empress looked at him, and his voice died quietly. "No," she said. "It's under mine now." Part 7. The truth gets around. The technician at the side console worked with shaking hands, pulling up the backup environmental records Jake had asked for back when nobody important cared to listen. The screen filled with clean rows of data. Temperature drop, chamber lock, badge access, suppressed alert, canceled maintenance warning, manual override. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was ordinary. The kind of truth people bury because it fits too neatly into a report. Jake watched the numbers scroll down the wall and felt his stomach tighten. He'd been right, but being right didn't make him feel any better. It just meant Naya had been sitting in that freezing room while everyone with any power found a reason to wait. The Empress read the log once, then again. Her face didn't change. "Who canceled the alert?" she asked. The technician swallowed. The request came through a student privilege account tied to House Vale. Cassian lifted his head from the floor. "Your Majesty, it was a discipline exercise. I didn't realize her biology would react that way." Jake looked at him. There it was. Not sorry. Not scared for Naya. Just careful. Trying to set the blame down somewhere soft enough to land. The Empress didn't look impressed. "You locked a child in a restricted chamber. She was concealing her identity. She's 11. The room went still. Even the translators seemed to hesitate before carrying that sentence across. Naya stood behind the glass, Jake's jacket still swallowing her shoulders, eyes fixed on the floor. The Empress turned to Director Crane. "You refused Technician Turner the thermal records when he requested them." Crane's mouth opened, then shut. The review hadn't reached that stage. A child was left shaking and half frozen, and your process hadn't reached the stage where facts were useful. Jake almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. The security captain stared at the floor. Cassian's advocate tried one more time. "Your Majesty, with respect, the human damaged property and acted outside station hierarchy." The Empress looked back at Jake. "Did you damage the door?" "Yes," Jake said. "Would you do it again?" He could have given the safe answer. The careful one. The one that might get him his job back and keep him from becoming a footnote in some diplomatic mess. Instead, he looked at Naya. "Faster," he said. A few officials flinched like he'd cursed in church. Naya covered her mouth with both hands. The Empress studied him for a long moment, and for the first time, something like warmth passed through her expression. "He held no rank," she said to the room. "No knowledge of her bloodline, no reward promised, no protection guaranteed, and still, when your laws protected convenience, he protected the child." Cassian lowered his head. His spotless smile was gone. The Empress raised one hand, and the station screens lit up with the imperial seal. "House Vale will surrender its advisory privileges pending a full inquiry. Director Crane is relieved of station authority. The security division will submit to imperial audit, and every protocol that let a child go ignored because her name was inconvenient will be rewritten before this station takes on another student." Jake stared at the screens, suddenly aware his knees felt weak. He'd expected deportation, maybe a fine, maybe a lifetime ban from anywhere with coffee better than in airports. He had not expected an empire to reorganize itself around a mistake made at a lunch table. The Empress looked through the glass at Naya, her voice softening just enough for one person to hear it. "You can come out now, little star." Naya walked through the door, past the kneeling officials, and stopped beside Jake instead of her grandmother. She slid her small hand carefully into his sore one. "He gave me his jacket," she said. Jake looked down at her. "Keep it," he whispered. The Empress heard him anyway. Everyone did. Part 8. A sandwich for 3. The official decree went out across Ark Station 9 before the cafeteria even opened the next morning. Not as a threat, not as a celebration, just plain words on every public screen in 13 languages. Every child, guest, worker, refugee, student, servant, and unnamed traveler under Dominion protection would from now on be treated as a person before being treated as a problem. The station started calling it the Turner Decree, which made Jake want to crawl into an air duct and live there until retirement. "Absolutely not," he said, when Director Crane's replacement asked if he wanted to make a public statement. "Her Majesty requested your presence." That's not the same as wanting to. Still, 2 hours later, Jake found himself back in the cafeteria, freshly showered, wearing his least wrinkled work shirt, his scraped-up fingers wrapped in clean white medical strips. The room was packed, but nobody was loud. The noble tables had lost their sharp edge of laughter. The instructors watched the doors like students. Cassian was gone, shipped off station, his family's banners pulled from the student registry. Jake didn't feel like celebrating when he heard about it. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like somebody had finally flipped a light switch in a room that had been filthy for a long time. Naya sat at their usual table, still wearing his oversized jacket, even though the Imperial staff had brought her 3 warmer robes and 1 ceremonial cloak that looked expensive enough to cover his mom's mortgage. "You know that jacket smells like coolant," Jake said, sitting down across from her. "I know," Naya said. "It's comforting. That might be the saddest review my laundry's ever gotten." She smiled, but her eyes were red at the edges. Empress Celine Oren walked in without announcement. The cafeteria stood up so fast the chairs scraped the floor in one nervous wave. Jake started to get up too, but Naya grabbed his sleeve. "Stay," she whispered. So he stayed, half risen and awkward, then sat back down like a man who just committed a legal violation in front of royalty. The Empress approached the table. Up close, she looked less like a statue and more like a tired grandmother who'd spent too many years being obeyed and not enough years being trusted. "Mr. Turner," she said. "Jake's fine, ma'am." A few officials behind her looked physically pained. The Empress ignored them. "Jake, I owe you an explanation. Naya was sent here without her titles because I wanted to know how my galaxy would treat someone I supposedly held no value." Jake looked around the cafeteria. A few faces dropped. Some looked ashamed. Some looked irritated that shame had suddenly gone in style. "That's a rough test for a kid," he said. The Empress's expression softened with something like regret. "Yes, it was." Naya looked down at the table. Jake could tell there was a bigger conversation waiting between them, one that didn't belong to any empire or any cafeteria. So he did the one thing he knew how to do. He unwrapped his sandwich, cut it in half, and slid a piece toward Naya. Then, a second later, he cut his own half again and pushed a piece toward the Empress. The royal attendants froze. The Empress stared at the sandwich like Jake had set a small animal down in front of her. "It's turkey," he said. "Probably. Station labels are more like suggestions out here." Naya laughed first. Then, quietly, unbelievably, the Empress did too. She picked up the small piece with careful fingers. "Is this a human custom?" Jake shrugged. "Not officially. But where I'm from, if you sit at the table, you eat." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The most powerful woman in the galaxy sat in a cafeteria chair a little too small for her, eating a questionable turkey sandwich beside her hidden granddaughter and the low-level human technician who'd treated loneliness like an emergency. Later, people would get the story wrong. They'd make Jake braver than he felt, wiser than he was, bigger than life. They'd say humanity changed Dominion law that day because humans are fearless. Jake knew better. He'd been scared the whole time. Scared of losing his job, scared of getting shipped home, scared of stepping into something he didn't understand. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Sometimes it's just noticing somebody sitting alone and deciding your lunch isn't too small to share. Before she left, the Empress asked him one last question. "Why did you help her before you knew who she was?" Jake looked at Naya, then at the cafeteria full of people who were finally learning to see the quiet tables in the corners. "Because kids shouldn't have to matter before somebody cares about them," he said. And that was the sentence that traveled farther than any fleet, deeper than any law, and longer than any royal decree. Not because it was powerful, because it was true. The end production notes, if useful for the channel. Length, approximately 30,000 characters, split into 8 parts. Clean act breaks for an audio/video episode. Dialogue and cultural beats leaned American. High school bullying references, student loans, medical debt, small-town rain jokes, Sunday phone calls home, coffee worse than an airport's, diner-style directness instead of formal phrasing. Happy to break this into scenes with time codes, image generation prompts per part, and lip sync markers next. Same as the Astria workflow. Just say the word.